So what should be considered? Well, care planning. Once seclusion is commenced, it shouldn't continue for longer than is necessary. Staff should maintain the desire to provide the best treatment during this period of seclusion. There should be a clear treatment goal and exit strategy with a target endpoint, making the criteria for it to be reached clear. It should also describe the frequency of reviews and who would be involved, as well as how the person would be reintegrated into the wider environment. Consideration must also be given to things such as eating, drinking, toilet, washing, exercise, other activities. Basic needs have to be considered. We often find that when we visit some areas, care plans can lack detail. So it's imperative that with this level of restriction, and the reason for it being risk, that plans must be detailed, describing the problem or need, what's helpful or what's not helpful. They should be strength-based, person-centred, goal-focused, with the aim of getting out of seclusion as soon as possible. So we should be thinking, when we're writing the care plan, the person's in, the goal is getting them back out. So there should also be participation with the person, as with all care plans, where it's possible. Discussions should be evidenced where there's been collaboration with the individual. Could this be an opportunity for advocacy to help, or where someone's unable to participate? It should always be documented. Where the person's not involved in the care planning, there'll be an expectation that family and carers and people with legal powers should be involved to gather as much information as possible. And following seclusion, this could be an opportunity to consider making an advance statement and getting the individual's perspective on what works for them. So safety and seclusion must be maintained. There should be a clear policy in place to guide staff. We can't put someone in an environment that will increase the risk of harm to others or themselves. Is this even the best environment to manage the level of risk that's been posed? Could we refer on to other services? The room itself must be large enough for safe restraint if required, and it should be robust enough to withstand potentially high levels of violence. There should also be forward planning. For example, fire evacuation, other eventualities happening around the ward at that time, both known and unforeseen. The environment should be free of ligature points, electrical fixtures, and prevent the barricading of the door. Staff must remain within sight and sound at all times, either through direct observation or it can be via CCTV. There should be consistency in care so that staff aren't increasing the risk of harm. Staff should be familiar with the policy and made aware of the known risks. They should also have knowledge of the care plan. Staff must always be mindful of risks, especially when medication is being used. They must have knowledge of any signs of deterioration and know what to look for in relation to monitoring someone's physical state and consciousness level, particularly when medication restraint have been used. What's the breathing? Are they overheating? Constant monitoring of that as well. Staff also must be knowledgeable on aspects of the individual's needs, and they should be familiar with the care plan and the circumstances that led to the seclusion so that they can provide support as well as managing the risk. They should always be aware of what has been tried beforehand. It may not be helpful in some situations for observations to be done by unfamiliar staff, such as bank staff, junior staff, who may have less knowledge of the person or the confidence, which in turn could actually increase the overall risk and the outcomes. Furniture should be removed from the room as well, obviously. Removal of items which should increase risk, but should remain sensitive to people's cultural, religious sensitivities, as this could cause further distress were not considered. Also things like safe bedding, clothing, items that need to be removed that could potentially pose a risk. Everything needs to be risk assessed. So the environment should be low stimulus with natural light with a window to look out of, but you also have to maintain the person's privacy, their dignity. It shouldn't be overlooked by other people. People shouldn't be able to look in and see the person. It should only be the staff. So what we also need to remember is the area might be noisy, and this actually might be amplified for the person who's alone in the room. Our engagement and participation officers consulted with people with lived experience, and they heard about rooms where people had been secluded, been drab and depressing, such as things like no clock, no way of knowing what time of day it was. And what you've got to remember, I suppose, is the person, they don't know how long they're going to be in there. They don't know when this is going to end. So it could be helpful to provide them with some small comforts like that where safe to do so. Also, some areas we've been told haven't had windows and couldn't say out of, and that can increase people's distress. It can be challenging, however, though, trying to maintain safety, but also balancing this with respecting the dignity of someone where they would like some level of privacy, because obviously they have to be observed for safety. So accurate recording forms a record of all the risks and actions taken to address the risk, and it forms a part of a person's care record. It can also be useful in the future to inform practice when you look back on what has been helpful or not so helpful for someone who's had seclusion before. They should provide regular comprehensive notes about the person's physical health and mental state. They should be written regularly. So it should be, for level 1, at least every 15 minutes. Datics should be completed in time. All records should be accurate, detailed, and in keeping with NMC guidelines, so the code of conduct. There are also the professional records, so the language should be professional, but descriptive, reflecting an accurate picture for the reviews, so that the reviews are informed. But we also remember that they can be used in the event of any subsequent adverse event. So need to be very aware of the language used. Also, dot your I's, cross your T's. Independent health and social care providers registered with the Care Inspectorate of Health Improvement Scotland have a statutory requirement also to record any incident of restraint or control, the reason why it was done, the name of the person, and who authorised the measures. There should be a clear plan of how to end a seclusion, and we should be thinking about this from the start. How can we safely bring someone out of seclusion? Debriefs for staff are required. Episodes of seclusion can be difficult to experience, and there are learning opportunities of reflection. So there is an acknowledgement that it's difficult for staff as well as the person who's been isolated. It's not a nice situation, and debriefing is important. So there should also be regular supervision for staff, where there's lots of new staff, because what's the impact on them? Is this the first time that they've been involved in a situation? What's their perceptions, anxieties? There should also be debrief for the individual where this is possible, with the inclusion of their reviews recorded in their care plan. And as I say, this might be beneficial at a further point in their treatment. What impact does it have on others in the environment, staffing levels? This can have a knock-on impact, such as a lack of activities due to staff being pulled away to other areas to help manage the situation. What are people's views about what happened? Could it trigger negative emotions and thoughts from others? Difficult memories from their own experience? We know that where there's a higher participation in therapeutic activity, there's a correlation with the reduced need for continuous intervention. So the impact on others, if activities are curtailed, there can be frustrations felt there, and it can have a very negative impact and increase risk in other ways. You've got to be mindful as well, as I mentioned, about people's experiences from before. So they'll be concerned. They'll be wondering what happened, because obviously with confidentiality, information's not shared with other people. So they will have questions as well about what's happening, and a fear, I suppose, of how this has been managed. So there's a lot of things to be taken into consideration. The people might be upset witnessing distressed behaviours that have gone on prior to the episode of seclusion. Aggressive behaviour, I suppose, depending on what led to seclusion. There could even be potential from others to seek retaliation. So staff need to be aware of the impact on the wider area and other people. So we also need to be mindful that where there's no oversight or guidance, locally, seclusion can impinge on a person's human rights. Vulnerable people are protected by human rights legislation. This isn't optional, it's law, and it's there to protect them from abuse of power. People in hospital must be treated with compassion and empowered to share decision-making to maximise their recovery. Where there's a violation of rights, there's always potential to cause harm. In a human rights context, where not lawfully sanctioned or where policy and procedures are not adhered to, this could potentially lead to deprivation of liberty in terms of the European Convention on Human Rights, Articles 3, 5 and 8. So Article 3 describes that no one shall be subjected to torture or inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment. In seclusion, there is a potential for the abuse of power. Article 5 provides the right to liberty and security, subject only to lawful arrest or detention under certain circumstances. People are already restricted by detention or subject to others making decisions about their welfare, where the adults with incapacity legislation is applicable, so their freedoms are even further curtailed by the additional restrictions from the use of seclusion. Article 8 refers to the right to respect for family and private life. There is a need to ensure that there's no undue restrictions, such as withdrawal of rights to see their family or engage in activities, unless there's evidenced and documented significant risks in doing this. We have duties to individuals Everyone is entitled to have their rights respected and be treated in a fair and just and equal manner, regardless of their circumstances and situation, including their gender, their diagnosis, age, or even any offending behaviour. The Commission's published Rights in Mind booklet, and it's designed to help staff in mental health services ensure that patients have their human rights respected at key points in their treatment. It has an illustrated pathway of a patient's journey through inpatient care and provides a list of human rights and legal rights at each key stage in their care and treatment. Although it's designed for staff, it can also be useful for individuals and their friends and family. We recently saw one lovely example in an inpatient area where staff had actually replicated the information on a larger scale. It was brightly coloured pictures, and it was very eye-catching, and it made it very interesting to read. And it was nice to see it actually in the main corridor of the ward, and people were reading it. So we should also involve others where it's possible. As our contact with family members to gain views, they should be a partner in care, and we should also value their opinion and take their views into consideration. They know the individual best, their history, signs of deterioration. They should always be included where it's appropriate to do so. Involving families and carers can help to protect a person's right to a personal and family life, and by seeking engagement with carers, we can learn better the needs of the person and help with care planning and future discharge planning. It's also important to remember that carers have a right to be consulted and have their views considered regarding care and treatment and safety planning. Seclusion should only be used in the context of a clear policy on the prevention and management of aggression and violence. The aim is to manage risk, not increase it potentially. We must also remember that it should be for the minimum amount of time necessary, and we should always be looking for an endpoint as the goal to the care plan we're writing it. So the impact of seclusion. People can associate it with being a form of punishment, especially when there's no clear communication. We should always look to maximise people's understanding, and we could look at what is available, useful, such as speech and language therapy input, also involve independent advocacy if this is possible. We should be trauma-informed in practice and consider psychological safety. Remember that seclusion it may cause re-traumatisation. And there's been some studies indicating differences in how the genders perceive it, but regardless, they experience it in a different way. What we already know is that it's lonely, frightening experience for people when they're already confused and distressed and actually have no control of their situation. And this is just another level of removing any further control. It's just highly restrictive. We should also be aware the relationship with staff can be affected as well. So both sides might feel that their safety is under threat during this time, and this could have an impact on future care and recovery if it's not managed safely and respectfully. Staff can feel tired, hopeless, disempowered, and feel that treatment hasn't been effective, that something's gone wrong. So training for staff is imperative, obviously with regards to the management of violence and aggression, but general training as well, and as I'd mentioned before, the debriefings, also reflective practice, supervision. So there is a mutual responsibility in developing recovery process. It's important to remember to maintain respectful and compassionate communication with the person, but be aware and appreciate when this can and can't be tolerated. So communication is key, and people must be informed of the reason and necessity of why they're in seclusive circumstances, and also they need to be informed of how seclusion can be ended. Give them a clear indication of what needs to be done to help them to go back to the wider environment and more contact with people again, contact with others. So as mentioned before, from the consultation with engagement, participation officers, we've heard about people's experience of seclusion being described as isolating, frightening experience, degrading, dehumanising, stigmatising. So this should always highlight for us why it should really be a last resort. It should never be used as treatment, punishment, or to manage shortages in staff providing care. Thank you.